House Targaryen only survived the apocalyptic destruction of the Valyrian Empire because they listened to a prophetic dream. Following a vision of their homeland burning, they packed up their wealth and fled into exile on the distant island of Dragonstone. Back in Valyria, they were only mid-tier nobles, but when the doom wiped out the other 40 ruling families, the Targaryens were left as the absolute last dragon lords on Earth. A century later, Aegon the Conqueror looked west toward Westeros. His ground army was incredibly small by the standards of the continent, but against 3 fully grown dragons, traditional infantry meant absolutely nothing. He achieved total military supremacy. To cement this victory, Aegon gathered the swords of his defeated enemies and let his dragon, Balerion, melt them down. He forged the Iron Throne to serve as a permanent physical reminder of his conquest. By imposing their will with literal fire and blood, the Targaryens elevated themselves above mortal kings. As long as they possessed dragons, they were completely immune to external military threats. But conquering a continent is very different from successfully ruling it. Almost immediately after Aegon's death, angry lords and religious factions began testing the crown, sparking a series of bitter rebellions. It took King Jaehaerys the Conciliator to truly stabilize the realm. Instead of relying purely on dragonfire, he built a functioning system of governance, using diplomacy, predictable laws, and strategic marriage alliances to keep the lords in line. Yet this long era of peace highlighted a dangerous reality. Because no outside force could match their military strength, the only entity capable of destroying a Targaryen was another Targaryen. The next 300 years of their reign operated as a countdown. 3 distinct, self-inflicted civil wars would systematically strip away the pillars of their absolute power. The first major fracture occurred over succession. King Viserys I named his eldest daughter Rhaenyra as his heir, but years later he had a son, Aegon II. Viserys failed to resolve the resulting tension, and upon his death, both factions claimed the throne. This erupted into the Dance of the Dragons. For the first time, family members weaponized their ultimate advantage against each other, using dragons to fight rival dragons. The casualties were catastrophic. By the time the fighting stopped, almost all the full-grown dragons were dead, and the few that hatched afterward degenerated and went extinct. Subsequent rulers, like the traumatized Aegon III, had to hold the realm together without aerial superiority. They were forced to rely entirely on standard politics and conventional armies. By slaughtering their own dragons, the Targaryens surrendered their untouchable military supremacy. They were now vulnerable, mortal politicians. That vulnerability was soon tested by Aegon IV, known as the Unworthy. He ran a deeply corrupt court, distributing lands and titles to his favorites while ignoring the health of the state. On his deathbed, Aegon made an incredibly destructive decision out of sheer spite. He legally legitimized all of his bastards and gifted the ancestral Targaryen sword, a deeply recognized symbol of royal authority, to one of them, Daemon Blackfyre. This single action manufactured an instant rival bloodline. Nobles who were dissatisfied with the legitimate heir, Daeron II, rallied behind Daemon, igniting the Blackfyre rebellions. Even though Daemon died in battle, his descendants continued launching invasions. For generations, the lords were forced to choose sides between competing Targaryen factions. This continuous splintering of loyalty destroyed the unified support of the Westerosi nobility. It tore down the second pillar of Targaryen power, leaving the crown politically exhausted. The final breaking point arrived with King Aerys II. Over time, the Targaryen family's known genetic predisposition for mental instability completely consumed him. Aerys developed a severe, blinding paranoia. He began seeing conspiracies everywhere and developed a horrific practice of executing his perceived enemies by burning them alive. The catalyst for total collapse came when his son, Prince Rhaegar, disappeared with Lyanna Stark. When Lyanna's father and brother traveled to the capital to demand justice, Aerys brutally murdered them. This execution triggered Robert's Rebellion. A massive uprising of major noble houses marched against the crown. As the rebel forces breached the capital city, Aerys attempted to burn his own city to the ground before being assassinated by a member of his Kingsguard. Unchecked madness had alienated the final remaining loyalists. Aerys severed the Targaryens' hold on the Iron Throne entirely. The physical empire was gone. The only survivors were Aerys' young children, Daenerys and Viserys, who were smuggled across the sea to live as exiles. Decades later, Daenerys orchestrated a miraculous rise to power. She successfully hatched 3 new dragons and gathered an army, vowing to cross the sea, reclaim the throne, and break the corrupt political wheel of Westeros. But her success revealed a tragic irony. Despite her initial intentions to rule justly, the hereditary curse took over. She succumbed to the exact same madness as her father, incinerating King's Landing and its civilians. She is ultimately assassinated by Jon Snow to stop the bloodshed. There is a dark, poetic justice to this act, as Jon is secretly the son of Prince Rhaegar, making him the final legitimate Targaryen by blood. Following her death, Daenerys' dragon physically destroys the Iron Throne with a blast of fire, melting the very symbol Aegon the Conqueror built centuries earlier. The Targaryens believed their dragons made them gods, but in the end, it was their intensely human flaws, ambition, betrayal, and madness that systematically burned their dynasty to the ground.